I want to welcome you to this session on securing the integrity of your research data and how the LabArchives ELN can help facilitate this. I am going to wait another minute or two before I kick this off because we're still waiting for a few folks to join. If anybody is having technical difficulties at this point, you should be able to see my screen. If anybody can't see my screen, please go ahead and use the GoToMeeting chat window to let me know. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Once again, thank you. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this session. My name is Matt Miller. I am the Western Region Manager for LabArchives, and I'll be acting as the proctor for today's session. In addition, I will be taking you through the final few slides and then the live demonstration portion of the LabArchives platform. Before I introduce Dr. Zwelling, I wanted to take care of a couple of housekeeping items regarding the GoToMeeting communication window. As you can see, the system automatically mutes all attendees. Both Leonard and I's preference is for questions as they come up, so please don't hesitate to interrupt us. There are a couple of ways to ask questions. The GoToMeeting window panel you can unhide and hide the window via this little red arrow. You can simply raise your hand to ask a question live, and I will go ahead and unmute you so that you can do that, or you can simply type in a question, and I'll go ahead and pause the presentation and ask that question so that Leonard or myself can respond. Additionally, depending on the size of your screen, the view, you may want to zoom in or zoom out either during the presentation portion or the live demonstration portion. PC platform, it should be in the upper left-hand corner, and in the Mac platform, it's right there at the top. And you can zoom in to fit the screen that you're on. So without further ado, I wanted to welcome you to the LabArchives Securing the Integrity of Your Research Data presentation. I wanted to introduce Dr. Leonard Zwelling, who is the former VP of Research Administration and the Research Integrity Officer at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center.
Thanks very much, Matt. The questions that we start with more than anything else is, why now is this an important idea? I'm having trouble getting the slides to move, Matt. There we go. Now we're moving. And I think that it's pretty obvious, but maybe not. And so I think we need to, again, I'm having trouble making the slides move.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you. The first thing and the most important thing, our data now are monetized in a lot of ways. They have much greater value than they used to. And the origin of this probably is in 1980 when the Bayh-Dole Amendment was passed. This amendment essentially said if you discovered something under an NIH grant, so the federal government was paying for it, you were allowed to commercialize it. And at that moment, every dean in the country got dollar signs in his or her eyes looking for the next Gatorade. The second thing that's happened, I think, and it's in the papers virtually every day now, is the issue of research misconduct. And we'll go into that in some detail later. But just to say that if there is some way in which allegations of misconduct come your way and you can show that they are not valid, That is very helpful to your research program. Data reproducibility, which I'd like to distinguish from misconduct, has also become a great problem, as the pharmaceutical industry depends more and more on findings within the basic science departments of the universities. They have had more and more trouble reproducing published data, and so there is a problem with record keeping and being able to demonstrate the validity of the data as it's published. Data security should be shouldn't be foreign to this group, because clearly the ability for people to go into other people's computer systems has become a greater and greater problem. So LabArchives is really a solution to all of these problems. Next slide, please. I don't know, yeah, there we go. So as I was saying, each of the discoveries that people make at universities has higher financial value than ever. It has financial rewards to the institutions who tend to want to patent these things and turn discoveries at the bench into commercial products. The individual investigators have a vested interest in the outcome of these particular investigations, because most of the institutions have a financial sharing program where not only does the institution serve to benefit from the discoveries, so do the individuals. It's also a way to create small businesses in any community, and it's in this day and time when the NIH has become a greater and greater problem in terms of having fewer and fewer grant dollars available. It's an alternate revenue stream for research itself for the individual institutions. So the data themselves have more importance. Now, as I was saying before, the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980 was the patent and trademark law, which basically said institutions could commercialize that which they discover on federal grants, and every deed saw the next Gatorade. Now, the criticism of this is that public money, that is taxpayer dollars, is being used to accumulate private wealth. And that is a valid criticism, but it is still true. This law is still in effect and is a way for institutions to enhance their revenue streams at a time when the federal government is decreasing its contribution to these institutions. Next, please. So these are the problems that have arisen: the data integrity, and with that, the issue of conflict of interest. And conflict of interest comes into play when the research itself is often being financed not by the NIH, but by private entities like pharmaceutical industries who have a vested interest in the outcome. And so the individual investigator is caught between the basically his fiduciary responsibility to his sponsor and his fiduciary responsibility to the data itself. Data reproducibility we talked about, as I did with data security. So the data itself has great value. Research misconduct is very, very well defined by the federal government and the Office of Research Integrity, which is part of the NIH. I should say that the Office of Research Integrity says that every institution that gets federal dollars must have a policy commensurate with the policy model that they give, and an individual at the institution who oversees allegations of research misconduct, that individual is known as a research integrity officer. This is a job I had for many years at MD Anderson. The definition of research misconduct is fabrication, where you make up data, falsification, where you change it, or plagiarism, when you steal it. There is also the question of misrepresenting data, where people edit out data, and part of the problem there is the ability, when data is in electronic form, to just delete it. And one of the things that LabArchives addresses is that it prevents this from happening. There have been some studies recently that have validated these concerns. The first is by a colleague, Lee Ellis and Dr. Bagley, who basically showed by working with Amgen that they were only able to reproduce 6 out of 53 seminal studies that were published in the literature. And the better the journal, the more likely it is to find this problem with reproducibility. When we learned this, we went and did a study locally at MD Anderson, that's the second part of this slide, in which we sent out a questionnaire asking both the faculty and the students and the trainees at MD Anderson, had you ever had trouble reproducing data that you read in the literature? And 50% of our respondents had. This says to us that the problem of data reproducibility and data integrity is not a small problem, it's a big problem, and it's probably a growing problem. Next, please. As I was saying, the Research Integrity Officer has the hard job of looking into allegations of research misconduct, which may come from within the institution or from outside. When I was a Research Integrity Officer, I had to look into allegations that came from both places, and the most important new development that I had to deal with that was problematic was the issue of how people were keeping their data. When I started as a Research Integrity Officer, everybody had notebooks, usually signed and bound notebooks. Very easy to audit. As things went along, people started to keep their data in electronic forms, sometimes in not very secure forms at all. And when I was a Research Integrity Officer and an allegation of research misconduct came forward, my job was to sequester the data, that I was supposed to take it. In the old days, when that was in paper form, that was easy on the investigator. I took the notebooks, Xeroxed it, gave them the Xerox copy, and kept the originals. When there were no paper notebooks and all I had was a hard drive, this became a huge problem for both me and for the individual investigator, who may be very innocent of any misconduct, but might have to be without his or her data for several months as the allegation was looked into. Next, please. Lastly, as we know from Edward Snowden, let's go back to the data security. Or you have the conflict of interest next. Okay, so let's go to the conflict of interest, that's fine. This has become an issue because of, as I said, investigators are being put in difficult situations with fiduciary responsibilities both to their data and to their sponsors. And unfortunately, the sponsors, in particularly the pharmaceutical industry, have vested interest in the outcome of the data. And so there's pressure on the investigator to get a specific answer when the investigator is trying to find out the truth. So this is another example of why having great records is critically important, not only to the sponsor who may want to patent that discovery, but the individual investigator who maybe have pressure put on him or her to get a specific result when they need to demonstrate the result they actually got. So if we are going to continue in the university as the dispassionate arbiter of truth, as we are supposed to be, having a database that is unquestionable and secure and auditable and time and date stamped is incredibly important, perhaps now more than ever. Next, please. Lastly, of course, there's the issue of data security. As we have learned, if the computers from the Department of Defense can be tapped, then certainly the computers that are in your particular laboratory are vulnerable. And we need to be able to keep our data in such a fashion that it is auditable, available, but secure from any outside tampering. Next, please. I think that is where I stop, but I'll go in just say that the solution in our mind is LabArchives, which is in full compliance with all data management plans. It will secure the data and ensure control over the intellectual property, which, as I said before, has tremendous value compared to where it was before. Next, please. So it would replace the paper notebook and, most importantly, replace Excel spreadsheets with much better secure, totally auditable, and totally non-erasable data repository. It cannot be deleted and has total protection. And I will allow Matt to tell you a little bit more about the details.
Thanks, Leonard. Again, please don't hesitate to ask any questions as I go through the remaining slides and enter into the live demonstration. So what is LabArchives? As Leonard said, it's an electronic lab or research notebook. It allows you to connect all the personnel working on a given project, grant, or experiment, and the reams of digital data produced in addition to the data that you're producing at the bench in ways that we never could with the paper notebook, and certainly solving problems in today's paper notebook and digital storage environment. So it's a secure, cloud-based collaborative platform enabling for the storage, organization, sharing, and publication of scientific data. Because of the full audit trail, it becomes a living repository for the scientific data, and I'll show this in my my live demonstration. And really is a cross between a data repository and a lab notebook, combining the features of collaboration software, wikis, search engines, and software tools. LabArchives has been tested and proven not just by the tens of thousands of scientists and students using LabArchives worldwide, but by the many institutions and Internet too that have gone through extensive service validations and security audits prior to their enterprise access to LabArchives on their campuses. Here's just a partial list of the LabArchives clients. I want to touch upon some of the unique benefits of the LabArchives ELN. We are the only ELN platform to offer institutional solutions for both research and education through our professional edition and classroom edition, run on the same core platform, but with some additional educational features and instructional features built into our educational classroom edition. We're the only ELN that's been awarded site licenses at major academic institutions worldwide, and the only Internet 2 approved and vetted Net Plus service provider. We do provide a full audit trail for all entries that is date and time stamped. As Leonard said, nothing can ever permanently be deleted from the system. We allow for full data sharing and manuscript co-authoring from an individual entry all the way up to an entire notebook, all in real time, and the system is available PC, Mac, with phone, tablet, iOS, and Android apps. Some additional benefits: we have a customization platform for template creation and application development. So at its very basic, a user with no programming skill set can build templates that can be reused within the platform, and at its more advanced, a user, an external service provider, or LabArchives ourselves can build custom applications that work within the framework of the notebook. And examples of this would be the ChemDoodle chemical structure drawing tool, our freezer box tracking, and inventory management, in addition to many others that have been built into the system. We also have direct integrations with several external software providers. We have a Microsoft Office plugin that enables for the direct connection in terms of pushing and pulling in and out of Microsoft Office without requiring the downloading and saving to your personal device. We also have similar integrations with GraphPad Prism, graphing technology, ChemDoodle, and FlowJo, which is a flow cytometry software. We also integrate DOIs through the EasyID platform, and we enable the searching and introduction of reference data and references using the PubMed platform. We also are currently working on developments with Vernier and Pasco. To simplify users' engagement with the system, we've built editors and viewers for common file types, enabling users to not have to have multiple software programs open for common file types. So in addition to having the direct integration with Microsoft Office, we have 2 Office editor programs built in that can be done web-based. We also have a viewer for Adobe PDFs, and then we recognize about 10 of the most common image files that would load directly into our image annotator. And then finally, we enable the automated data upload from devices and software directly to our ELN. So obviously we would love to have direct integrations with every possible software or hardware vendor in the research space, but that's a long and arduous task, so we have an automated data upload capabilities. Certainly wanted to touch upon security as one of the most important aspects to research integrity. LabArchives is a secure application written in Ruby and runs on Linux servers. Servers are protected by redundant industry standard firewalls and security devices, and we do use Amazon Web Services for storage of the data. All network and application traffic is logged and monitored 24/7 for any suspicious or unusual activity. SSL certificates provide full-time HTTPS for all user interactions. So as data is being uploaded to the system, as data is being accessed and pulled back to a local user's machine, and as the data sits at rest, it is encrypted and under all of those circumstances. Supports both proprietary login option and allows for integration with Shibboleth. And we've successfully passed numerous network and application security tests from multiple external vendors and from the institutions themselves. Compliance is another big issue related to electronic lab notebooks. Certainly the federal funding agency data management policies, LabArchives is compliant, not only compliant, but enables for the very easy execution of the data management plans that are required for every paper that's submitted. In addition to that, we're Amazon Web Services, FDA 21 Part 11 compliant, HIPAA, FERPA, and ADA compliant. And as I mentioned, we have the Shibboleth single sign-on integration. Wanted to quickly touch upon the Internet to Net Plus service validation and note that LabArchives is the only ELN service provider that's been approved by the Net Plus service team. Institutions such as Caltech, Cornell, Yale, UT Southwestern, and University of Wisconsin-Madison were the early adopters and were part of the vetting process. Cornell sponsored LabArchives to meet the program requirements, which included review of our security, the features, usability, documentation, and future feature roadmap. So at this point, I'm going to jump to the live demonstration. So, of course, I will not be providing a full demo at this time, but I did want to highlight the key features most relevant to security, auditability, and access rights, as Leonard mentioned. But I did want to take a minute before I jumped into those features to explain the platform layout and the structure so we all understand what we're looking at here. This is a view of one of my notebooks and a page in one of my notebooks. And if I can direct your attention to the left-hand side of the screen, the notebook navigator, you can see that I'm in my CD4 project-based notebook. You can also see I have access to many, many notebooks, some of which I own, denoted by the black checkbox, some of which I may have access to just one entry in a read-only fashion. Others I may have access to the entire notebook in an editable fashion. And when we look at how we've organized the framework of the notebooks, it's very representative of how we all are comfortable storing data. Sorry, we have a quick question. I'm going to pause here for a second. Leonard, the question is, could you address how an RIO would sequester the electronic notebooks of a LabArchives user? And this is from Carrie.
Yeah, the issue would be that they wouldn't really have to sequester it. They would just have to be able to have access to it. And because the data are secured and cannot be erased, that is the reason that data are sequestered. The reason we capture notebooks once there's an allegation of research misconduct, is to prevent the person who is called the respondent, the person who's being accused of research misconduct, from changing anything. In this particular system, all we need is access to the system. We don't really need anything over and above what anybody else has access to right at, in that system. And that's the thing that is so different about LabArchives compared to all other ways, because all we need is permission to look. The data are secured as they are.
And Carrie, I will also be addressing that at the final stages of my demonstration, showing how that access can be provided and showing an alternative way of creating a snapshot of a notebook at that moment in time for offline evaluation as well. So if once I reach that point, if you had some specific questions, I can address those. So jumping back to, we store data very representative of how we're all used to storing data on our computers now, folders and subfolders, but instead of there just being files within those folders and subfolders within LabArchives, we have what are called pages. So that in this case, the cell death page that I'm on represents a page, and on those pages, we can really put any type of data, and that can be data. We have entry types that are native to LabArchives, enabling data entry directly within the system via those entry types. And also, of course, as Leonard mentioned, many of the laboratories now are producing digital data that exist outside the realm of the notebook and would exist as attachments, and any type of data from any hardware or software can be added to LabArchives. So I want to take a second and talk about the entry types, show you the layout of a page, and then I'll jump into the research integrity aspects and the audit trail. So at the top of the page, we have our Add Entry toolbar with the native entry types to LabArchives, the rich text. You can also see as I hover in between entry types, I have the Insert Entry type pop-up window with those same entry types. Many of these are pretty self-explanatory. The customization platform is the widget platform. You'll notice that as I begin to use widgets, as an example, this the Spitzer ICC protocol is a widget. Those themselves become entries that enable me to use them at any time in the notebook. So jumping to audit trail, LabArchives tracks every entry, and we have a full audit trail of all the work that's been done in the notebook, from the very first entry that's been uploaded, any modifications to that entry, to any other entries that have been added to the notebook. And that's done, and I wanted to highlight, we have up in the right-hand corner page tools, and you can view the revision history or audit trail for the entire page and all the entries on this page. Or we can view the revision history as with this IPGel for just one entry. So let's go ahead and review the revision history for this entry and the information that LabArchives tracks for each entry. We have the date and time that the work was completed. This is a link that will either take me to the page and that entry at that moment in time, or open up this entry as it existed on December 5th, 2014. I wanted to note that this date and timestamp is not controlled by LabArchives or the user. We have a connection with the National Institutes for Standards and Technology, the NIST, so this is an external date and timestamp that can't be modified. Because we track all versions, I can download this version as it existed on December 5th directly from this location. I can download the original, or I can view and annotate this particular version on December 5th. As you can see, we also track the version entry number, so that we've had 28 modifications to this particular entry. We track who the work was done by, so in these cases that we see, I was the one that did the work. We show and track where the user was when they performed the work, what revision action was taken. We note the data type, any change in the data storage based on changes made, and we, in addition to enabling you to go to this version at that moment in time and work with it, I can also revert to any of these earlier versions. So several options when it comes to tracking and also reverting back to those earlier versions. In addition to the revision history that you see via the audit trail, we also display the very last audit, or the very last editing that was done, the user that did the work, and the date and time. that work was done. Because that we save and track all of the audit trails, having these versions really lends itself to referenceable linking strategies within your notebook, which make for accurate reproducibility of experiments at that moment in time. So if we look again at this IPGel entry here, you can see that I have two links associated with this entry. I have a link that is the cell count pre-treatment that is an ongoing set of data. So as you can see here, I'm linking to the most current version of this Excel spreadsheet that exists in some other location in this notebook. And this is where the living repository aspect of LabArchives comes into play. Is I've noted that this link will always point me to the most current version of this entry. So as this Excel spreadsheet is modified over the course of time, I'm not going to see older versions. I'm always going to be shown the most current version of this entry. In terms of reproducibility of experiments and referenceability, I can also link to the specific version that I used on the day that I first did this IPGel experiment. So as you can see here, I'm linking to a specific version modified by me on this date. Quickly note, sorry, I'm having a quick internet issue here. Editing these links is extremely easy to do. You just simply edit the link, and it gives me the opportunity not only to link to a page or entry in this notebook, but to a URL outside of this notebook. And it enables me to browse this notebook, go to my protocol library, find the gel, and then link to that location. Very easy to add an additional link, describe that link, and then determine if I'm going to link to the most current version. If there aren't any questions on the audit trail and linking, I wanted to jump to page signing and talk a little bit about the paper versus digital aspect of page signing and the improvements, the vast improvements over paper that LabArchives provides. In addition to that full audit trail, so we in a paper notebook, the onus is really on the individual that they're the ones that are accessing their notebook. They're making the notations, they're signing the page, they're noting the date and time that they signed the page, and they're also it's on them to not go back and make changes, and if they do, to note those changes. Within the system, because of the audit trail and tracking each user's work within the system, that can't be spoofed. And if we go again up to the page tools here in the upper right-hand corner to the Sine function, signing the page digitally affixes my signature to that page. So it notes the individual that signed the page, the date and time that the page was signed, but it also freezes this page at that moment in time. So no additional work, no editing can be done to this page. And I wanted to, at this point, show you what a signed page looks like. You can see that of the 4 pages that I have here, the page at the bottom, the cell count JS page, has a little lock icon on it. And if I open up this page, you can see that it was signed by me on June 9th at such and such time. And you can see that I no longer have the ability to edit this particular entry. I can still, however, view the revisions. I can print it. I can share this with others. I can create a DOI, which I'll talk about in a second. And I can also, each of these comment bubbles here on the far right-hand side to the right of the last known audit or edit, we have a comment bubble. So I can still make referenceable commentary between those that have access to the notebook. So jumping back to my cell death page, I want to talk now a little bit about access rights, permissions, and sharing. And as I mentioned, you can set those permissions or invite people to view or edit from an individual, all the way from an individual entry. As you see here, I can share just one entry, all the way up to a page, subfolder, folder, or the notebook itself. So let's go ahead and share this cell death page. And anytime I click Share, Permissions, or DOI, I'm going to have this 4-tabbed dialog box pop up. And it enables me to invite additional users to view this portion of the notebook. And I wanted to note that when I invite somebody to view just this page, they're obviously going to see the notebook that I've added them to. They're going to see the JS 2014 folder. They're going to see that I'm in the May folder, but they're only going to see the cell death page that I've added them to. They will not see the other subfolders in this particular folder, the other pages that exist, or any of the other folders or contents of those folders. I can add, and as I add a user, I can add them at that moment in time and give them the rights to view or the rights to edit this notebook. I can just send that permission to them, or I can type a subject and a message and send a copy of this to myself as well. Once a user has been added to the notebook, which is represented on the Groups for People with Access tab, you can see that this particular notebook has 4 users that have been added to the notebook. We can see the role of these particular users. There can only be one owner, and there can be as many administrators or users as there are user seats for this particular account. And you can see that John Smith, who's administrator, can view this. So I can set his rights to edit in real time, and now John Smith would have a right to edit. Richard Romero has no access, but I can certainly, in real time, provide him with access to view or edit. In addition to the individuals, I can also, another feature that we have is creating groups and managing the permissions of individuals as they are in relation to their group role. So as you can see here, John Smith is part of the cell culture group, and I've set his rights via the group to view. This means I don't have to set each person individually. If I had 20 users of this notebook, I could manage those based on the groups associated with this particular notebook. Wanted to quickly note, we also, the way that the LabArchives system works is each entry, each page, each notebook, each subfolder has its own unique location within our database. And this is the unique location for this particular entry. And if I were to share this link with each of you today, that would not provide you access to this location. The LabArchives system checks the credentials for each user as they access each portion of a notebook that they may or may not have access to. So this is not a publicly available link, and I haven't added you guys so that this would not be available to you. And then finally, I wanted to quickly go over DOI management. For those of you that aren't familiar with DOIs, they are digital object identifiers that essentially enable a digital asset to have a long-time digital location. So as servers locally at a university may change, the assets associated with DOIs don't migrate. So I wouldn't have to go through a massive migration of all of the data that I've associated and published. Again, this is another, I wanted to point out another aspect where the living repository feature exists, in that we can create a DOI such that I don't have to manage showing the most current version of this page. So if I know that I'm going to be adding data to a DOI that I've created, I can set it to the most recent version, and I can also set it as it exists at this moment in time today. I can also allow visitors to view earlier versions or newer versions. I have that level of control. And the DOI really enables the execution of the data management plan. So if there is an audit, this is a LabArchives ability to enable that, the audit to be successful, certainly. there aren't any questions, which looks like there's not, I wanted to end with how do we get data out of the platform. Sort of back to Carrie's question, how does an ROI officer gain access to the system? And I mentioned there are two ways to do that. One would be simply by adding the Research Integrity Officer to the notebook. And under the main menu, Notebook Settings, Notebook User Management, we would simply add the new user's email address, click Add, and provide that user with access, the Research Integrity Officer with access to the notebook, and hence having that audit trail, having the ability to view this notebook at this moment in time. The work can continue by the lab as the Research Integrity Officer is going through their audit. Another way to get data out or to make a backup copy would be within utilities to create what's called an offline notebook. And what this would do is zip up the contents of this notebook at this moment in time. Whoever initiated the offline notebook would get an email with a zipped file with the contents of this notebook, and they'd be able to install that on their local machine and access this via a web browser. It looks very similar to the online web-based version that we're looking at here, except it would exist on your local machine, and it's not quite as visually appealing. This does conclude my portion of the notebook. I wanted to note one quick thing coming back to the cell death page. You can see that there is a delete button associated with each entry. And I wanted to note that nothing can ever be permanently deleted from the system. Deleting this entry would simply hide it from view on this page. And if I went to my revision history for this page, as you saw when I looked at revision history for this particular entry, you can see that did I delete? No, I haven't deleted this entry. Haven't hidden it from view. You can certainly undelete. As you see here, I can undelete an entry that's been deleted. Carrie, you had a question. Who would be the one to add the ROI as a user? That would be the either the owner or one of the administrators of the notebook. So somebody in the lab. Typically in our enterprise license settings, we also do have terms in our agreements that allow for access being provided in other means if you go through appropriate channels, the appropriate legal channels within the university that we've laid out in the agreement. So if you have a non-responding PI or lab, there are other channels that can be gone through to get access to a notebook. Any other questions? I'd be happy to unmute anybody that would like to ask a question live. Well, great. Well, thank you again, everybody, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join the session today. Thank you, Leonard, for providing your important commentary today.
Yeah, if people want to send me emails with specific questions, that's fine. leonard.zwelling@gmail.com. I'll answer the emails if you don't feel like you want to ask a question out in the open, but you might want to ask it to me directly. That's fine. I'll be happy to answer them.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your morning and or afternoon, depending on where you're located.
Thanks, Matt. Okay.